So, Michael, we hear a lot of things about biblical theology, and sometimes they feel really academic, like distant. But how that impacts the church? Why biblical theology is important for the church?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. What difference does biblical theology make for the church? First, we've got to understand what biblical theology is, particularly the way I'm talking about it in my book. Sometimes when we say biblical theology, we just mean a theology that is biblical. In other words, we want our theology to be in line with the Bible, and that's really good, and that's not what I'm talking about. And sometimes when we talk about it in that way, really what we're meaning is systematic theology. Yeah. We're asking the question, what does the Bible say about, and then you fill in the blank. And that's what systematic theology does. It answers the question, what does the whole Bible say about sin, about men, about the church? Those are systematic theological questions. Biblical theology, the way I'm talking about it, is different. Biblical theology is a reading strategy. Biblical theology is a commitment to reading the Bible as a single story written by a single author with a single plot. And that plot is the story of salvation and how God has glorified himself in saving a people for himself through Jesus Christ. Now, when we come to the Bible using the tools of biblical theology, all of a sudden what happens is the Bible is no longer a story or a book that was written a long time ago that gives me answers to questions that I have. Now, all of a sudden, the Bible is a story that begins at the beginning of time and ends at the end of time. And therefore, I find myself inside the story. I'm not looking back at it, I'm in it. And it's not just me that's in it, the church is in it. And so, biblical theology helps us understand who we are, where we've come from, and where we're going. This will radically change the way we use the Bible. When we think of, particularly the Old Testament, only in terms of systematic theology, oftentimes what we do is we take these Old Testament stories and we turn them into moral lessons, the Christian equivalent of Aesop's fables. And so the story of David and Goliath is a story that's teaching me to be brave, or the story of the little boy that Jesus tells in the gospel when he's wanting to feed the crowd of 5,000, and this little boy comes and shares his loaves and his fishes, and all of a sudden that's just a story that's teaching me that I should share too. Or then I get to stories like David and Bathsheba, and David commits adultery and commits murder and commits official corruption and graft and abuse of power, and I find myself thinking, yeah, I better not do that, but I don't think I'm going to do that. I mean, I don't think I'm ever going to be an official, a king or a president or something. And so I'm not even sure beyond, I shouldn't commit adultery, how that even is going to apply to me. When we treat the Bible that way, we're treating it as an answer book, as a book that's going to give me some tips on living so that I might be able to live a better life today. That's not what the book is about. That's not what the Bible is about. It turns out that the Bible isn't about you. The Bible isn't about me. It's about Jesus. And it's telling this incredible story of how God prepared for the Messiah to come and how when he came, he accomplished all the promises that had been given. And now how we are caught up in that incredible story of the Messiah. So it changes the way I think about myself. And once I have learned who I am, once my identity has been changed, that's going to change the way I live. It's going to change the way I think about the church. It's going to change the way I go about ministry. So I think biblical theology, when it's properly understood and used, has a profound impact on the church. When I started preaching the Old Testament in the church that I'm in now, and I've only been there for a few years, and this is a church that had never been exposed to biblical theology before. I started preaching from the Old Testament, and I had these older members come up to me, people who had been in the church for 50 or 60 years, people who have been following Jesus longer than I've been alive. And they came up to me and they said, "You've given us a whole new Bible. We had no idea that Jesus was in the Old Testament. We had no idea that the Old Testament was relevant to us as Christians in the same way that the epistles are relevant to us as Christians. And it began to change the way they read their Bibles. It began to change the way they used their Bibles. When I got to the church that I was in, most of the Sunday school lessons for children were taught out of the Old Testament, and they were teaching them to be good. Mm-hmm. Well, when we teach people to be good, we're actually teaching them the law, and the law is going to condemn them. They're never going to be able to be good. We need to be able to teach the Old Testament as well as the New Testament in such a way that it points us to Christ, who's the only one who is good, who's good for us, so that now by faith in Him, we can be counted good in God's eyes and begin to live out that new identity in Christ.
Wow, it changed a lot.
It changed a lot.
Thank you.
Yes.